welcome tonight to our presentation by the Jamestown Historical Society. My name is Peter Fay, and I am going to be your guide tonight for our journey through Jamestown history. We have with us today Christine Jackson and some of her family, including Joe, who are coming back to Jamestown after 6 generations, I think, 6 or 7 generations. And she'll be talking to us tonight about her experience of researching her heritage. She's a longtime Rhode Islander, grew up in Rhode Island, and she has been lucky enough to have lots of history written down by her ancestors about where she came from, who she came from, and a little bit about their lives. And let me explain to you why this is important for Jamestown. I received a call from our folks at the Historical Society saying they had an inquiry about an article I wrote some time ago. I wrote an article about this man named Bristol Underwood, who had been enslaved in Jamestown in the 1700s and grew up on the Underwood farm, which is up on East Shore Road. So I wrote this article about it, and by the way, many of you Jamestowners may know that farm as it was known more recently as the Brazil farm. But it's up on East Shore Road. So I wrote an article, a very long article in the Jamestown Press, and I got an inquiry about it, and there was a woman by the name of Christine Jackson. She's calling from Providence, and she said, what can you tell me about this person you wrote about, Bristol Underwood? I said, well, I can tell you anything you want to know. I don't have his biography, his whole history, but I know where he was born and where he lived and what his circumstances were. And she said, well, I'm his he was my 3rd great-grandfather. And I said, are you kidding me? Bristol Underwood was born in Jamestown, 1773, I believe, right before the Revolution. He was born enslaved up on the Underwood farm. Now, those that don't know the Underwood farm, the Underwoods were one of the old families of Jamestown, a wealthy family, owned a lot of land, had a big farm there. Very large family, Quaker family, and they had quite a few enslaved people, 6, I believe, on their farm, and then they had various other families, relatives around the island with more enslaved people. So it was a very expensive, wealthy family, and after the Revolution, I'm sure most of you have heard, might know this about the history of Jamestown, that after the Revolution, many of the people that were formerly enslaved in Jamestown, one way or another, over the next several decades, obtained their freedom, possibly through running away, possibly through being released from enslavement by their owners because the economy was no longer profitable for slavery so much in the northern colonies, and various other reasons. There was of course some religious opposition and other reasons, but slavery just did not endure in the North for very long. Well, I shouldn't say for very long. If you are enslaved, it was a lifetime. It was unending. But there were some enslaved people that never were let go, were not freed in Jamestown all the way up until 1825 or so. So sometimes it took many, many decades before freedom actually came there. But for Bristol Underwood, he became free sometime around 1780, 1790, long after the Revolution was over. in 1780s. So the story you're gonna hear is the result of him moving out of Jamestown, along with many other enslaved people that all left Jamestown. Most left Jamestown to find work elsewhere. Bristol moved up to Seacon, Pawtucket area. He married a North Kingstown lady, and she died. He married again and had kids. So his children had children, and those children had more children, and so on until we get 6 or 7 generations later. We have Christine Jackson calling me up and asking me about whatever I could tell her about her great-grandfather. And this is it's a good beginning for Jamestown and for Jamestown Historical Society, because very little has been shared with the town of Jamestown about what really went on in this island. 1/3 of the population of Jamestown were enslaved, and up until the Revolutionary War, they remained enslaved, and only over a long period of time did they get the freedom, often through their own devices, purchasing their own freedom, like the Remington family did, or fleeing like others did, getting on a ship and never coming back. Many young African Americans got into whaling or other trades to try and earn a living. But there's always been a black presence in Jamestown, and that's never really been well acknowledged. And it remained, there were families that remained in Jamestown well after manumission. Many came back to Jamestown. Many Southerners after the Civil War came up from freed slaves, came up to Jamestown and worked at the hotels for the decades, late 1800s, early 1900s. We had many families that were here that continued to live here and are still here. So it's a good time for Jamestown to take stock of what we never knew, what Jamestown residents have never been told about their own history. And luckily we have people with us tonight that will help us in that. And I also want to acknowledge some of the people here that spent time in Jamestown, including Ernest Gibbons' great-grandfather, who was a preacher at the AME church in Jamestown, right up the road from us. Mrs. Johnson used to come as a child at Jamestown, go to church here, right? Sundays or whatever, she'd come to Jamestown. So there's always been a lot of activity of the black community in Jamestown, and I think it's very fitting that we kind of take stock and look back and uncover the stories that we haven't been told. So I really feel very grateful for Christine Jackson to come and share some of her story with us about her ancestors. So Christine?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, friends. Thank you for being here. I hope I don't chew your ear off. I had a 5th grade teacher write on my report card, Christine talks too much. So I have notes that will kind of help me be concise. But we're going to start here and now, and I'm going to work you back to my family. And I'm the one on the left, in case you couldn't tell. And the woman on the right was Ida Mae Brown. She was my mother's first cousin. My first cousin once removed. And she was almost 100 years old when she passed away. And she happened to save everything. So that's how we always had knowledge of our history, our family history. And it was all written, and there was, supporting documents and all. And everything she ever told me, checked out. She's never made up anything or was confused. But the thing about her, in her old Victorian sensibility, is you didn't really talk about family stuff. You just didn't talk about things. And if you asked too many questions, she'd say, they're all dead. What difference does it make? But I pointed out to her it must have made a difference because you saved all this stuff and you have all this stuff in your head. But I'll just start with her. Her father was a vaudevillian. She used to say vaudeville. Mm-hmm. I wish I had tape recorded her because of the things that she said in her expressions. Her father was in vaudeville, and as such, her parents didn't make a home together. They married shortly before she was born, and she'd probably kill me if she knew that years later I'm telling a group of strangers that her parents were married shortly before she was born. And her father ended up, being on the road, so he became the he was vice president of the Colored Waterville Benevolent Association in New York when he died. In fact, it was that benevolent society that buried him, whereas Ida and her mother lived with my great-grandmother, her grandmother, and she was raised in the old West Elmwood section of Providence. I don't know if you all are aware of that area. If you know where the old Narragansett Brewery is in Providence, it's generally around there, the Mashpog Pond area. And because she lived with my grandparents, and she was alive when my great-grandmother was living, she lived with them. She inherited all the stuff and all the family law and saved everything. She had an old Singer sewing machine. And I was sitting in her house one day, and I said, Cousin Ida, I bet you can't tell me how much you paid for that. She said, I have the receipt somewhere. And she went in her room and came back with the receipt from 1920 when she purchased that sewing machine. But anyway, she left school in the 8th grade to help support the family. And that was kind of common at that time, at least in my world, in my family's realm. And she, her first job was with the seamstress. She used to thread the needles for the seamstress. I actually have Ida's baby pictures and parents' pictures and some other little things about her. But she was very vital in us knowing about our background. She got married for the first and only time when she was 71 years old. And when I was growing up, I thought 71 years old was so old. Now that I'm 67, I can see me getting married. But her devotion was to her family, her aunts, her uncles, her parents, her mom and grandparents. And she just was responsible for supporting and keeping everybody, she was just entrenched in family and church, and I don't think she had a social life other than that. But I remember when I found out she was 71 and the only time she was married, I was a teenager, and I said, did you have to get married? She didn't think that was funny. I don't think the woman ever had a belly laugh in her life, but I miss her. I miss her. She and I became great pals. So let's see if I can get this right. So that's an article that Peter wrote. It's almost a year ago that I came down and met him, and that's a picture of me on the Underwood property and the original stone wall. I can't even tell you how that felt, looking at that stone that's still here. I had to touch it. I kind of felt, I don't know how to I didn't really want to cry, but I was very emotional because I didn't think this would happen. I didn't think that, even though you know these names, this kind of thing puts flesh on them. So that was a real nice experience. Okay, Peter. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna come back here. These are my parents. My father was born in Providence, but his parents were from Petersburg, Virginia. They were part of that great migration that happened where a lot of rural African Americans moved to urban areas for better opportunity. I don't know when my grandparents actually arrived in Rhode Island, but I know by 1913 they were settled. But this story, no, let me just backtrack. My father was very athletic. He was a member of the Rhodey Tennis Club. He won all kinds of track awards. He golfed. He was an avid golfer, and he was a member of the Invaders Athletic Club. It was a baseball team, and that was the reason why my parents met. Actually, my mother grew up in West Elmwood. She was working in a dental office, making good money for a colored woman. That was what she said. Still living with her parents. The dentist had assumed when he hired my mother that she was a white woman, and I don't know, he found out that she was not, and he sat her down and explained that he was considering firing her, but he wasn't going to do that because she had, she was professional and personable, did a good job, so he says, I'm just going to keep you on, but nobody really has to know, nobody really. It wasn't anything my mother was ever ashamed of or hid, but that was an assumption that was made. And you can look at her and see why. That maybe when she was a young woman, she had bright red, fiery red hair. But she was at the Buckland Park playground to watch a baseball game, and my father was one of the players, and they married in 1942. So this presentation is on my mother's side. I'm my mother's seventh child. She was her mother's seventh child, who was her mother's seventh child. And I bring that up for no reason other than I thought that was interesting. Ooh. So anyway, these are my mother's parents. My grandpa, Price, was born in Cambridge, Mass. He was in Rhode Island. He was actually an optician. He made eyeglasses. And there was something, I'm not really sure about this, there was something about the dust and shaping the glasses or filing, and it affected his lungs and that. He had to retire from that. And I think the remainder of his life, he was a custodian for various Providence schools. My Nana, she died a few years before I was born, so I never got to meet her. She was born in West Elmwood. Grandpa was her second husband. And I remember Ida talking about Nana's first husband. She said, my grandmother was Hannah. She says, that Hannah gave her husband a bill, first husband. And for years I didn't know what kind of bill she gave her first husband. And it wasn't until I was fully grown that she was talking about a bill of divorcement. Oh. I don't know. I wish I had tape recorded this woman. But I don't know too much more about their lives to tell you. Family oriented, poor, struggled. Yeah. That's that. Now these are my great-grandparents. My great-grandfather was born from Westchester, Pennsylvania. He was a hostler, which is someone who handles horses, which was a very important thing considering that was the mode of transportation for the most part. I don't know too much more about him. My great grandmother Anna, she was born in Warren. I never could get a birth record on her. I don't know why it was that she was born in Warren, but it was probably where her parents could get work at the time. And she and her mother and her siblings outlined their Narragansett lineage in applications for funds awarded to New York Indians. They maintained they were direct descendants of Elijah Wampy, one of the first settlers of Brothertown, New York. In 1775, he received lot number 117. But their applications were rejected, and I want to just kind of explain Brothertown in case you don't know. The Oneida Indians of New York offered land to the Christianized Indians, the different tribes, Mohegan, Pequot, Niantic, Narragansett, Montauk, and Tunsis, because of land encroachment and lack of resources. They really were having a hard time, so was the Oneidas, and offering them their land, and they emigrated to that, and it was officially founded as Brothertown, November 7th, 1785. Hey. Oh. So, I bring up Brothertown and their application because I have actually the original handwritten letters where they outline their association to Elijah Wampy, one of the original settlers. You had to be a direct descendant in order to qualify for these funds that were being allocated. And I even have the letter of rejection that my great-grandmother got. And the reason was she was not considered a New York Indian, but a Narragansett Indian. I'll just leave it at that because it's a convoluted story. You don't even, you don't want me to go through. All right, let's see who's next. That's my great. Why is that turning and I don't want it to? I don't know what I'm doing. I told you I never did this before. All right, so anyway, here's my great-grandparents. Great-great-grandparents. That's, why is that splitting? Yeah, but I'm not touching it. I want to be right here. Okay. Okay, so anyway. These are my great-grandparents. My great-grandfather was born in Marlborough, Mass. I don't know much more about him. And my great-grandmother is Ardelia Underwood. She's the daughter of Crystal Underwood. Her mother was named Mary Onsley. The part of Seekonk, Mass, where Ardelia was born is now Pawtucket. And she married and lived in that area, but later they moved to Providence. So it's Ardelia's mother's lineage that connected her to this Elijah Wampy of Brothertown. And that's a page from her application. I actually have a copy of the full application over there on that table. So my third great-grandparents, as I mentioned, Mary Onsley was born in 1777 in what's now Olneyville, section of Providence. I think it was part of Johnston, or maybe I have it in reverse. And Bristol was her husband, and that's the subject of this presentation. His first wife was my third great grandmother, Mary, as I mentioned, and they had Ardelia. His second wife was Eliza Champlin, and she's buried next to the first wife in East Providence in the Newman Church Cemetery. And he had a third wife who had married 4 times herself. She's buried with her sons, one of her sons' burial plot in the North Burial Grounds. And that brings me up to Bristol. And oh yeah, I forgot. That's Mary's grave. And that's the transcript of what's written on there. I was going crazy trying to find that grave. I do everything on the internet, websites, Ancestry. My sisters and brothers before me, they did it the old-fashioned way. They were in libraries and graves, and they did the research on town halls. They had boots on the ground, and I sit in my bed with my feet up and not on Ancestry. But when I found out where her grave was, I would go through this cemetery, back and forth, rain, snow, and her nickname was Polly, and I would be, where are you, Nana Polly, all dramatic and stuff. Tripped a few times, fell. My sisters, they went to the church across the street, the Newman Church. This is the Newman Cemetery, and they went and asked for the records. And I was away, and they sent a picture of them around the headstone. I was so mad. So the old ways are still valid, And that's his second wife's grave. They both were in their 40s when they died. I don't know where Bristol was buried, but this is where I'm going to turn it over to you, Peter. Right?
No, that was wonderful. Thank you for that. I'm just going to share a little bit about what we know about Bristol in his life in Jamestown. And as you can see, this couple down on the bottom left, John Carr and Clarissa Carr, they were Bristol's parents. So you might say, well, wait a minute, their name is Carr, and Bristol's name is Underwood. So how did that happen? Well, that's where I come in. And when we talk about the naming of people in Jamestown, particularly enslaved people in Jamestown, it gets very complicated. And therefore, I want to show you a little bit more about Bristol's upbringing in Jamestown and his parents, John and Clarissa. So I'll just kind of give you the background that I have memorized about the Underwood family in Jamestown. And if we get the video going, I'll show it, but maybe not. The interesting thing about Bristol Underwood is that he was born enslaved in 1773, but by the time he was about a teenager, he was free. So imagine growing up enslaved, owned by the white Underwood family in Jamestown, and your parents are both enslaved, and your parents' name are Carr, and your name is Underwood. So why would that be? Well, that is because in Jamestown and everywhere else in Rhode Island, in fact everywhere else in the country, people were passed down, enslaved people were passed down within families. And the Carr family, which many people in Jamestown know, you can go and visit the Carr homestead and the Carr Lane and all the other Carr artifacts of Jamestown. They settled Jamestown in the 1600s and lived here passed down their generations year after year. They also passed down their slaves from one generation to another. So the Carr family married into the Underwood family, and the way property works in inheritance is it goes to your children, and the property goes from one generation to another. So Mary Underwood, who inherited her enslaved people from her father, Nicholas Underwood, Mary Carr inherited her slaves from Nicholas Carr, married Mr. Underwood. Now, she married Benjamin Underwood. So, Nicholas Carr, who gave his enslaved people to his daughter, is well known in Jamestown because he founded the Quaker Meeting House. He provided the land on which is built, and you can visit today, the Quaker Meeting House off of Carr Lane, off of Wheaton Lane, sorry. So Nicholas Carr was probably the most active Quaker in Jamestown from the 1600s all the way to the early 1700s. Very well known, very active in the Quaker community, and he passed his slaves to his daughter. His daughter married into the Underwood family, and after his daughter married into the Underwoods, her enslaved people had children, and therefore the children were owned by her husband, and her husband's last name were Underwood. Therefore, her enslaved people named Clarissa Carr had children who then became property of her husband, who was named Underwood. Therefore, Mr. Underwood's parents were named Carr. So it's somewhat complicated, but let me give you a little bit idea of what the Underwood family was like. Benjamin Underwood was, again, a Quaker, very well known, leading Quaker in Jamestown around the Revolutionary War. He led the rebels in Jamestown. He fled when the British came and fled to North Kingstown. Became the keeper of all the Jamestown records. All the records we have in the Jamestown town archives were saved by Benjamin Underwood. After the war, he was indebted because he put up a lot of his own money to keep the town running during the war. He could not pay back his debts, and his debtors came after him to try and get back the money he owed them, and he was unable to pay. He ended up in prison over in Newport. So here we have Benjamin Underwood, a revolutionary patriot Quaker, who obviously supported the military during the Revolutionary War, even though he was a Quaker, an owner of slaves, in prison himself for debt. And he spent, I believe it was 7 years in prison over in Newport. If you're in prison in those days, you have to find something to feed you. They would not feed you. They would not feed or provide you with any clothes or anything in prison. So he had to find people that would come and bring him food while he was in prison. Eventually, I believe his debts were relieved, were vacated, because people knew that he had actually incurred these debts by being the town moderator, the town record keeper and moderator. So he was eventually freed, came back to Jamestown, and at this point, his enslaved people were gone. Now, I'm not sure what happened. Did they run away? We don't know. Did he manumit them? There's no record of that. Usually when people manumit their slaves, there's a record. So we don't know how Bristol ended up getting his freedom. But the Underwood family, which lived up on East Shore Road, um, had a very, very large farm there. And the Underwoods had a lot of children in their family. The White Underwoods. One of them, John Underwood, died on the west coast of Africa. And you can probably guess what John Underwood was doing on the west coast of Africa in the 1760s. He was trading in slaves. He was a slave trader. His other brother, I believe it was James, died in Suriname, also in the slave trade. All the children were Quakers in this family. So, and then Benjamin, of course, owned 6 slaves in Jamestown. So, this is the odd situation that you'll see over and over again in Jamestown. Since the only religious meeting house in the town was a Quaker meeting house, virtually all the families were Quakers. And in Jamestown, since 1/3 of the population were enslaved, pretty much all the Quakers owned slaves. So it was very common for Quaker families to have enslaved members in their household that worked for them, provided all the wealth. And it was only after 150 years that slavery finally was abolished in Rhode Island. So all I can say is that we know that Bristol left as a young man, went up to East Providence or Pawtucket, worked in several factories, hauled wood, cut lumber. He married a woman from North Kingstown, a Narragansett from North Kingstown. She died, married again, married a 3rd time, and had his daughter Adelia, who it seems considered herself Native American. I think that's probably accurate. And certainly Underwood himself, if you look at the records, many records term him as what they call mulatto, which in those, it's a derogatory term today, but it meant that he was mixed heritage, African American and Native American. So, like many of the African Americans in Jamestown, his family was intermarried with Narragansetts. So I think throughout the whole, certainly his family and his mother was claimed to be Narragansett, Clarissa. I think a very tight cultural bond was established between the Native Americans in Rhode Island and African Americans, even though they were enslaved. They nevertheless often considered themselves Native American, and continued to participate in Native American culture after they were free. And I think it's kind of it's a surprising situation that Jamestown goes from 1/3 African American to almost no African American residents within about 30 years, 30 to 40 years. And that's right after the War of Independence that this happens. And he was part of that migration out from Jamestown, looking for opportunities, looking for ways to support himself, naturally migrating to the areas that had lots of jobs and black community like in Providence, and probably churches and other things that he would be able to feel like he was part of the community that would support him and his family and his offspring. So that's what we know about Benjamin. We know Bristol, rather. Bristol died in 1850 something, fairly old. And when I wish I could show you the article in the newspaper that was published, but they said Bristol Underwood died in East Providence, or probably Pawtucket, and they said he was a Herculean man of Herculean proportions. And the paper said that it was known that he came from Newport And then the following day, they followed up and said, we found out he actually didn't come from Newport. He came from Jamestown, and he came from, he had been enslaved by Benjamin Utwood of Jamestown, and he died in Pawtucket as a father of one child. So that's most of what we know about him. We know a little bit about we know about, he had a brother named York. York Underwood was a little bit older than him, and he and his brother both left Jamestown after the Revolutionary War. His brother York eventually came back to Jamestown about 20 years later. He came back because he was destitute, he had no one to support him, and he threw himself upon the town saying, please support me and provide me with a shelter and room and board, place to live. At that point, he was quite old, maybe 70 years old. So the town sent him an official notice telling him he had to leave town and that he had no business being here. He protested and said that he was born here and had a right to be here. The town then went to his former enslaver, wrote a very nasty letter to his enslaved former owner saying, we understand that you owned York Underwood and we demand that you come and take him because he has no business being here, and we cannot support people that we do not need to support. And later, about a month later, town records indicate that they had found out that actually he was, in fact, legally a resident of Jamestown, and the town was forced to support him. They put him in the poorhouse. They provided him with food and clothing, and they paid someone, I think $1 a month to pay for his room and board when he was here in early 1810 and 1811. And then finally in 1811, York Underwood passed away from illness, and the town buried him in the common burial ground right here at the corner of North Main and Narragansett, and he is buried there. He has no gravestone because the only people that have gravestones were the wealthy. So anybody who's not a landowner with lots of wealth had no gravestone. So he's buried there, and his brother Bristol is buried somewhere around Pawtucket. We don't know exactly where. And of course, that wasn't the end of the family. The family lived on, and his daughter Adelia lived on and married and had kids. Her kids had kids, and her kids had grandkids and great-grandkids, and they're with us today. So I want to thank Christine Jackson and her son Joe for coming down and sharing with us that great story of their heritage. And I hope we'll find more people that we can connect back to Jamestown and your cousin.
Stephen Augustus, he's a part of Street.
And Stephen as well, right. So we have a great history to share, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to have more of these stories that we'll be able to bring to you and share with you about the great history of Jamestown. And Christine will be happy to answer questions if anyone wants to have a question they want to ask her.
Actually, I have a question, but it's not directly to the family. I'm just wondering, how do the Quakers reconcile their ownership of enslaved people when they were Quakers, and Quakers did not support, at least in theory, slavery? How do they reconcile that?
How do Quakers reconcile the slave owners?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. You're going to answer.
So it's a complicated question, like everything in history. It's not a simple answer, but Quakers, I can't, I'm not an expert on Quakers, but certainly we know from Jamestown's experience that until 1850, the Quaker Meeting House was the only religious institution in Jamestown. So pretty much everyone was Quakers here. And the understanding of Quakers changed over time. Newport, the Quakers in Newport were very active and had thousands of members in Newport, and they all participated in the slave trade. This only changed significantly in this area. In the 1863 was when the Quakers finally said, we ask all of our members, or we mandate all of our members, that they must look inward and see that their slaves should rightfully be free. And this was like a kind of a statement that the Quakers made, but it took decades before they could even really enforce this. So for the first 150 years of Rhode Island, Quakerism, the biggest slave owner in all of Rhode Island was a Quaker Redwood. Redwood family were very large. He had 150 slaves down in Peru and Antigua. So it was only in the late 1800s, around the time just before the Revolution, that Quakerism tended to first turn against the slave trade and then later turn against owning slaves themselves. Yet in rural areas, particularly like in Jamestown, Quakerism was not like in the cities. They changed much more slowly, and all the way up until the early 1800s, Jamestown Quakers held slaves. So it was only 10 years before the state of Rhode Island outlawed slavery that Quakers in Jamestown finally freed all of their slaves. So it took decades and decades.
I just want to say, there's a lot of hypocrisy and that in terms of enslaving people, owning people. It was always justified in some way. You dehumanize people, you don't view them as human beings. But what was interesting to me is my father's people from Virginia, if you talk about slavery, they were slaves, lived on plantations. Here they lived on farms and were servants. So it's kind of like, they sanitized it. And I mean, it was just, I understand the question. How do we do this? Thank you.
What question about your ancestors are you still, is the one you really want to find the answer to? That's eluded you.
I don't really think I have anything that's hanging that I mean, I wish I knew where Bristol was buried. That would be interesting. Right now, I'm trying to figure out if we were in fact Narragansett or Wampanoag, because I'm finding out that Bristol's wife Mary, her family name was Onsley, Onsley, Walmsley, Wampy. See, that's the Indian version, and it was anglicized. And I'm looking at some Onsleys that were in Johnston that were recognized as Wampanoag. So it's like, it's always ongoing, but if I ever find out or not, I think I know enough. And I'm just, my mission right now is just to let my family know, the younger people know, because I don't know what will happen when I pass on, what my son's going to do when he goes in my house and looks at all the stuff I have. But he's into family anyway. But, a lot of the stuff won't mean anything to anybody unless they know how it relates to them. So that's what I'm trying to tell people, anybody who's interested, because this isn't for everybody. Some people could care less. I have a sister, her eyes glaze over when I start to talk. She was going to be here tonight, but she couldn't because of some medical conditions. But I think she just didn't want to hear it. No, she really was disappointed. But yes, sir.
Yeah. My sister traced our lineage way back at least to my ninth great grandfather, and he came to this country in 1646 as part of the Dutch East India settlements of Albany and Schenectady in that particular area. And she did a very well-researched thing, which is centered around all of us. And my question is, well, let me just give you the end of that story, which is that it was interesting to me, but I don't understand. I don't understand that it had any value to me knowing, or me being that we're all. Well, we all can trace ourselves back forever and ever until there's two people, I guess, walking around. And I never quite understood what the value in knowing that is. It was interesting to me that of the people that were basically near my mother and dad's generation, who they knew. But beyond that, I couldn't get it all interested. And my question to you is, what do you think you got from knowing from all the work you did and all the study you did and the frustration that you went through? What do you think the value to you is as an individual today?
Well, first off, I'm very interested in history. I'm fascinated by history, local history, and then when you find that you can place your people within the history of an area, it's just, I'm not looking for, I'm not really looking for anything, maybe you can get Indian money. No, this is just something I'm personally interested in. The information we have puts meat on people's bones, it makes them real, and I'm just fascinated by it. Yeah. No other reason but fascination. I've got the information, and there are people who are interested in that information, and I'm passing it along. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did, and I wasn't thinking when I was using the word value. I wasn't thinking at all about a kind of monetary thing. I was thinking
I'm just saying that a lot of people think that's my motive.
Oh, no, I wasn't even suggesting
No.
That it's just that I was wondering what I should have gotten out of that. What does it actually tell me? And she sent me all of these sheets.
Yeah,
and
that's what I said.
Really
You're either into it or you could care less.
Yeah.
And that's fine. It's fine, and that's why I direct my energy to people who come to me and ask me for information, because I was doing that, sending out lists and genealogy, and the papers probably got thrown in the trash. So now I've gotten a little smarter, the people that have a high interest. But if I sat and talked to you about your family history, I'd be very interested in it, because that's just the nerd that I am, But yeah, it's not for everybody. Stephen?
I'd like to answer something to your question.
Yeah.
Can you speak
A lot
louder?
of people elect pictures. And the pictures are from grandparents or family members in the same. Who are these people? Who knows about these people? So I took my picture to Chris. Chris answered the questions as they define my needs.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Did Ida give you the documents?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Did Ida give you the documents that she had?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of that stuff on the table directly from her. And she led a very stable life. She didn't move around a lot. A lot of people lose things to fires. Had a very quiet life. I don't even think she ever went out of state beyond Massachusetts. So, you go over to her house and you ask a question, she can go right in the room and pull this thing up, So, yeah, that's where all of this information that I have is from her, and I feel very fortunate about that, because she was a bridge for me to really get to know, you know, my people.
Yeah, when you're when you're researching your Native American ancestry, is it how different is it? How is that experience different than research that you have done on other parts of your family?
Well, the thing is, growing up, I wasn't raised with any knowledge of my history. So it wasn't anything that I even thought about. My mom never mentioned it. My even cousin Ida never mentioned. The most Ida said to me was her father was Narragansett Indian, but it wasn't. We weren't born and raised up in a tradition, so that wasn't even the focus. And I didn't really believe that, because everybody says, "Oh, you know, I got Indian in me." Everybody says that, right? And I just thought that was that part of that mentality. And what I really thought about that was, if I'm being very honest, people would say they were Indian because they didn't want to say they were of African descent.
Yeah.
That's just in my experience in life, you know. But where was I going with that? Oh, I didn't believe that I had any native background until I got my DNA, and I'm 7% indigenous. So that's when I started being interested in that whole business, because it was true, you know. But it was never my focus. I want to find out the African that I descend from, so I can go into village and, like Alex Haley, and dance, dance with my people. Yes.
Don't you think that that's true, because people can, majority of people can trace back when their families came to America, and there's like this curtain for a lot of African Americans that it started when they got here, because they have no record going back to where they were in Africa. So that's why it's so important,
Yeah.
because there's like this curtain of what was before this.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
I have to say what Laura says is so very, very, very true. And I have a cousin who has started and originated an African American museum in Marshall, Virginia. And I will never forget her telling me, because I never ever thought about it, because I only knew about my heritage from my great. And she said to me, that you have to realize we are from African. We are African American descendants. How can we go back that far to Africa, to where our parents were taken from their original land and brought to the United States of America? And very few people can do that. Many people from Sierra Leone can do that, but very few people can do it. And then she told me something that resonates in my mind, and it will forever and forever. And Peter is the reason why I'm co-founder of Middle Passage, because he calls me one day, I had no idea, out of the sky, and tells me about Middle Passage Port Marker and what they were trying to do. And that he said, and we would like to have somebody from the city of Newport that can help us create an organization that can tell us more about African Americans, not just in Newport, but around it, and of course Jamestown. And I thought about it, and I said, okay, but only if you become the co-founder with me, because I caught him. He can't hide. But my niece said something to me. She said, I want you to always remember that most of the other nationalities in the United States of America came through the Statue of Liberty. People of color, African Americans, came to the United States of America through slave ships.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, that's when it occurred to me that you're right. And we are here, and we have built the United States of America through our work, through our labor. So it's time we begin to be recognized all over the United States. And I want to say thank you, and I want to say thank you, Peter. Thank you for
I used to be enslaved in Sierra Leone, know where they came from.
Yes, I think, Peter, you can build it in terms of, there was an oak lived here with that and died there.
I don't have any magic answers, but I do know that Jamestown is. There's so many incredible stories in Jamestown. One of them is actually a story by a man who grew up on the farm, Remington Farm, which is right up on North Road here. A man named Ormond Remington, O-R-M-A-N, or O-R-M-A-N-D. He grew up in the 1700s as an enslaved person, enslaved by the Remingtons, and he eventually, when he was about 25 or 30, saved up enough money, and somehow, I don't know how, because it doesn't, people, slaves basically have no money, but he somehow obtained money enough to purchase his own freedom, and he purchased that, and 2 years later, he had more money and purchased his wife and his 2 daughters, who were on the Eldred farm just down the road. And those that don't know what Eldred Road is where Eldred Field is, Eldred Soccer Field. We pass by it every day, and no one seems to realize that the John Eldred, after which we named that, was one of the largest slave traders, actually went to West Africa and purchased slaves. But he, this man, Ormond Remington, grew old. He had children here in Jamestown. Eventually, when he was 75 or so, his daughter said, Dad, you got to come live with me. You're too old. Come to Newport and I'll take care of you. He went to Newport, lived with his daughter, and the town council in Newport found out. And they called him up in front of the town council and said, you have no right to be here. You're not a citizen. You're elderly and you are infirm, and we may have to take care of you and pay money to take care of you. Therefore, you need to go back to Jamestown. And they said, tell us your history and verify whether or not you actually are a citizen here. And Ormond Remington's response was, well, when I was 7 years old on the west coast of Africa, I was captured and I was put on a slave ship from the Rhode Island slave trader Robert Stoddard, and I ended up in Newport and I was sold to the Remington family. And since then, my entire life I worked in Jamestown, laboring for the Remington family, and eventually got my own freedom. And it was only in the last 2 years I moved to Newport. So we actually have testimony from someone in Jamestown that was African, on the African coast, and said that he actually recounted exactly the slave traders, the captain's name that brought him to Newport, and the date that he was brought here. So that's pretty close to having a full record, a full knowledge of your heritage from all the way back to Africa. And those Remingtons had children, and they eventually married into the Rice family in Newport. And I have met John Rice and some of his other relatives in the African American community there. His ancestors were all abolitionists, fought against the slavery in the 1800s. So this history of African heritage, I mean, why would I care? I'm not African. But I care because it's part of my history. This is actually our own history. This is Jamestown's history. And if we don't know our own history, we will never understand ourselves. So to understand where Jamestown came from, how we developed as we did, how the government ended up, throwing off what they call the enslavement by Britain, and after doing that, continued to enslave their own people. You don't understand America unless you really understand all of America, including the history of slavery, the history of manumission, the history of freedom that was fought in a horrendous, disastrous civil war. So there's a lot of history there from where we all come, and tells us a lot about our institutions and our own families. So that's why it's important that we share these histories that have never been told. So I think we're shortly we'll be out of time in the library. They're going to be closing soon, I think. I'm not sure if it's 7:30 or 8. But I really want to thank everybody for coming. It was a really wonderful experience to have Christine and her family come and share their discoveries about their ancestors that grew up on East Shore Road at the Underwood the Farm in Jamestown. So let's give Christine a thank you.
Stand up.